What's up guys, welcome back to another fancy Premier League video. This is just finished on game week 1 now, so this is just going to be a video reviewing game week 1 and giving my predictions for game week 2. But just quickly, just looking at how the team did, I thought, well, the team did very well, but the real judgment will be how they do from game weeks 1 to 3, because even though I've done well in game week 1, if they score poorly in 2 and 3, I won't necessarily consider it a good group of players. So really the judge will be, by the end of game week 3, how many points have I scored, and that's really what I'm going to be judging on. Other than that, I mean, we had a really good game week, 108 points, which is, I think that's probably the best game week that I've had in, or the start to a fancy Premier League, other than maybe my first season, but that was more based on luck rather than planning. So it's been a really good start to the season. I think Benrahma and Son were quite lucky picks because they were kind of players that ended up on my team very last minute. Jota was pretty much being switched with Greenwood, who also got, I think he got like 7 points, so wouldn't really make a difference. But I got quite lucky with Son and Benrahma, but I think the rest of the picks made a fair bit of sense. One thing which actually did change last minute was I got rid of Alexander-Arnold for Tsimikas, so I could afford Son, and it worked out for this game week. But the real test will, like I say, will be game weeks 3 and 4, and maybe 2 and 3, and maybe even 4 as well. Because when I was watching the Liverpool game, like I was worried about not having Alexander-Arnold. He was putting a lot of threatening crosses, so he could be a really important player going forward. So yeah, the team did pretty well. The real judge will be end of game week 3. We'll see how these players do. So just reviewing the game week 1 fixtures. I was supposed to do a review on Norwich versus Liverpool game, but I thought it might just be a bit more efficient in terms of time to just kind of give a quick run through of each team and how I thought they did. Obviously, Brentford versus Arsenal, I already went through there. I did a whole match review on it. So if you want to go and watch that, that'll give you the most information. Man United versus Leeds. I did predict game week 1. In my game week 1 predictions video, I predicted it would be a high-scoring game. I didn't quite predict as high as 5. I predicted like 3-1, I think. But 5 was pretty good, and it turned out that Fernandes was the one who got the most points. But in terms of who the chances fell to, Greenwood and Daniel James also got a fair few chances. Daniel James just had no real end product in terms of creating or his shooting capabilities. He just kind of ran on the wing and then didn't really know what to do with it. So I think when Sancho's there, it'll be a massive upgrade for them. Greenwood, he still needs to work on being an overall forward in terms of like his hold-up play, in terms of timing his runs, his decision making. I thought that's something that's missing from his game. But Fernandes in this game, it kind of goes without saying because he got a hat-trick, but he was absolutely phenomenal. Like every single one of his goals was not a world-class goal, but you could tell that only a world-class player could have got a hat-trick in this game, I think. Like the first goal that he got, the touch was incredible, and then the final finish as well was really good. But the reason that this was such a high-scoring game, and the reason that Fernandes did so well, was because the Leeds were missing Calvin Phillips. In my opinion, I think he would have made a massive difference to Fernandes not scoring as highly, because I think it's Robin Koch, he was in the place of Phillips because Phillips wasn't fit enough in time, and he just couldn't keep up with Fernandes. I think if it was Phillips, it would have been a different story. So yes, it was a high-scoring game against Leeds, but I wouldn't expect that going forward from Leeds, and I wouldn't expect it every time from Man United either, although I do think they will have maybe a few more games like that, but don't expect too much from them too soon. They will do well, but perhaps not 5-1 well. I don't expect 5-1 every game, basically. Burnley versus Brighton. I didn't get a chance to watch the whole match. I think I watched match of the day. I think my game week 1 predictions, I predicted a 0-0 or a 1-1 draw. It wasn't far from the truth. I mean, 2-1 to Brighton. I think that one of the goals, in fact, Burnley's goal was a little bit lucky. I felt like Tarkowski basically pushed Maupay over, although Maupay was kind of like blocking him, and he could have easily just fallen over just for dramatism as well. But referees have been instructed not to give easy fouls or easy penalties, so I think it kind of went with the gist of what referees have been told. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I wouldn't target either of his teams, to be honest. I think don't target Burnley, don't target Brighton. I thought that neither of them did particularly well. I think target teams who are playing against Burnley may be good, especially away from home, and target teams against Brighton, although Brighton can be a very unpredictable team. So monitor my summary for this game is monitor Burnley, monitor Brighton, and probably target teams playing against Burnley because they didn't look that great coming out the door. But yeah, I mean, low crosses for Burnley were basically their weakness. If you can send in high crosses, Tarkowski and me can basically deal with those all day, but low crosses are really their crutch. So Chelsea versus Crystal Palace. I actually got this prediction spot on. I predicted 3-0 to Chelsea, but the only downside of picking Chelsea players is they do have a few tough fixtures coming up, and their team rotates probably just even as much as Man City, but they probably won't be as free scoring as Man City's, which makes them a difficult team to target players from, potentially until they get Lukaku or Lukaku starts playing and they have decent fixtures. But yeah, I mean, Crystal Palace looks pretty dreadful, to be honest. They didn't look like they knew what they're doing. Patrick Vieira's playing a 4-4-2, which doesn't suit their players, and it's as I predicted, really. Like, they just didn't really look like they knew what they were doing. Neither did Vieira. So definitely will be targeting teams playing against Crystal Palace, especially when they're at home, where they're going to be looking to get a win, which means they're probably going to be trying to play more on the front foot, which will put them at a disadvantage. So, granted, it could go the other way, and maybe they pick up some home form, but personally, I will be targeting teams playing Crystal Palace. Everton versus Southampton. I had no idea how this fixture was going to go. Southampton are a really hot and cold team. Like, they just, no idea how they usually play. But wasn't really surprised that Everton put a few past them because they're very easily capable of that, Southampton. Players that impressed me from Southampton, though, I thought Livramento looked really good. But the problem with Southampton is they have absolutely no squad depth. I mean, yeah, on the right side, maybe they have squad depth, because they've got Kyle Walker pieces as well. But if one of their centre-backs get injured, now that they've lost Vestergaard, I don't see there being much hope for them this season. I would keep an eye on their home and away form because I think that their home form will probably be much better than their away form. But either way, I think that they're a goal that's going to let in they're a team that's going to let in a lot of goals. I don't have much faith in their goalkeeper either. One to keep an eye on, though, I'm not sure his price. Let's just quickly check his price. If they do change goalkeepers, I'm curious to know if Forster is 4 million. No, so he's 4.5. So I wouldn't target any of their players at all. Southampton just look dreadful. The only one that I may target just purely for a bench option is, let's just have a quick look, Livramento, because he's 4 million. He's probably the best for 4 million defender options, although it's only been one game week, so hard to judge. But yeah, so Everton's aim for this fixture was basically just to put in loads of crosses. Like, they crossed so much, especially from Richarlison, Townsend, Gray, like Digne. They were all just firing the crosses, hoping to feed Dominic Calvert-Lewin and whoever was in the box at the time, basically. And it kind of worked. It worked, especially for Dominic Calvert-Lewin. That's how he got his goal. So the plan was basically to play on the counter and put in loads of crosses and set pieces, which is what I expect from a Rafa team. I don't expect loads of open play from Everton teams, from Rafa teams. I expect basically them to try and score set pieces and counter-attacks because they've got pacey wingers. So that will definitely be something to keep an eye on in going forward because Digne could be a really good option. So could Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, or even maybe Demarai Gray. There was quite a few different options from Everton, but their defence did look a little bit shaky. So that's one thing I would say if you're thinking about getting Digne in is he will probably get assists, maybe even a goal, but their defence didn't look that great. Granted, they were missing Yerry Mina and Ben Godfrey, so that could make a difference. And once the team starts to gel a little bit more, but they were a pretty organised team. They looked pretty decent. So Everton definitely wants to watch going forward and monitor. Leicester versus Wolves. I predicted I think it was like three. I predicted three predictions for this fixture. I predicted either 1-0, 3-0, or 5-0 for Leicester. Obviously, that's kind of cheating a little bit, but one thing I did get right in all those predictions was that Leicester would score and they would keep a clean sheet. Granted, what was really frustrating is that I had Bertrand and he got COVID, so we tested positive for COVID. So luckily, I got quite lucky because I had my defender come off the bench from Brentford and he got me the clean sheet. But really, in terms of the match, I thought that Wolves Leicester were actually quite unlucky not to get more goals. Firstly, I felt like Harvey Barnes had a really good chance to set Vardy up, and he just fluffed. He just tried to go for himself and fluffed it. They still look like they're not fully up to scratch, Leicester, and Wolves are going to take time to click. But Wolves, I thought, actually were not too bad. I mean, they were having a high line, so I definitely think that defensively they didn't look that great. But going forward, they looked really good. I mean, they were creating chances, they just didn't finish them. So it could be a Brighton season for Wolves. I think they remind me a little bit of Brighton, but perhaps with less switching of the players, in that they tried to keep possession and press a lot and create chances that way, and they do, but they just didn't seem to finish them. So we'll definitely interesting going forward to see how they do. But I would also target teams playing Wolves because I think eventually that high line, teams that are good on the counter attack, they're going to punish them for that high line. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on Wolves, and I would potentially target teams playing against them. Watford versus Aston Villa was a really surprising game. I was not expecting 3-2, and I was not expecting Aston Villa to start so poorly. They looked like a team who just didn't know what they were doing. Matt Targett was getting absolutely rinsed by Ismail Sarr. And Buendia looked like a championship player. They just didn't look like they were gelling. They really looked like they missed Jack Grealish. I thought that the only upside was that when Leon Bailey came on, he looked like a real good player. So I would definitely keep an eye on Leon Bailey. I think he could be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, I mean, Aston Villa were slightly underwhelming. I think Ings was in fact, he was very lucky to get that goal, get that penalty. So yeah, definitely an interesting one from Villa. I think they're going to have a very up and down season, I think, based on what we've just seen, and given that they've lost their star player. But moving on to Watford, they basically played a 4-3-3, sat deep, and looked to break on using the pace of their wingers. And it worked really, really well. I mean, Sarr was creating so many opportunities for Sema and Dennis. And their midfielders did pretty well as well. But I just thought they looked pretty good, Watford. Granted, they did letting 2 goals, so I think that they will probably concede a fair few penalties, Watford, because of how clumsy some of their players in their box. But going forward, they look like they've got some really interesting players. So I would definitely target teams who are weak to the counter attack. I think that Watford will play well against teams that are weak to the counter attack. I think that Cucho or Hernandez, he looks like a real good player. Reminds me a lot of Aguero. Obviously not at that level yet, but he looks like he could be a real player. Same with Dennis and Sarr and Sema. I think that they're going forward, they look really good. They do look vulnerable. To potentially to open play, but more likely set pieces. I mean, they don't really look like they know what they're doing against set pieces, so they definitely still look vulnerable. But yeah, going forward, they looked pretty good as well. Liverpool versus Norwich. This went pretty much as planned. I kind of predicted. Obviously, I predicted Liverpool win, as did most people. The bookies were very, very much the favourites there for Liverpool. I kind of was up in the air because it was very much. This prediction was very much depending on whether Van Dijk and Fabinho were back. And for most of the game, Fabinho didn't play, but having Van Dijk made a big difference. I thought that Norwich did actually create chances, but nothing too threatening. And Liverpool going forward looked really, really good. I thought Simicast put in a lot of crosses. So did Alexander-Arnold. They just looked very, very threatening. But what I will say is that I am a Jota owner, and I thought that Liverpool looked so much more fluid as a team when Firmino is playing at the strike position than when Jota is. I don't think Jota does the same thing that Firmino does. Jota is more an out-and-out inverted winger or goal scorer. He's not he just doesn't have the same presence that Firmino does in terms of chasing down the balls and the counter pressing. So I think they looked miles better when Firmino was starting as striker. I would personally look at a potential probably rotation between Mane and Jota. I don't think there'll be actually that as much rotation between Firmino and Jota because I think Firmino does a much better job at striking than Jota does. But yeah, really interesting fixture. Main ones to target for me. I'm looking at getting Alexander-Arnold in my team. I thought I was watching this game and thinking, man, I really wish I had Alexander-Arnold on that because it was very scary watching how easy it could have been for him to get 2 assists in this game. So yeah, definitely I'm going to be targeting obviously the obvious ones like Salah, Mane, and Alexander-Arnold. May consider Jota if there's an injury, but for now, just sticking to those 3 or 2. Probably not Mane, just Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Newcastle versus West Ham, I had no idea what to think going into this fixture. When I made the Game Week 1 predictions back in July, I predicted, I think, like either a 1-0 to Newcastle, 1-0 to West Ham, or a 1-1 draw. Either way, it was all low scoring, and obviously, as you can see, it was one of the highest scoring matches of the game week. So, outstanding players. Obviously, it was Antonio who stood out for me. I thought that he did really well. He also looked like he was on penalties as well. But one big caveat with West Ham, which I would very much keep an eye on over the rest of this transfer window, is if Jesse Lingard rejoins West Ham, because that will put a massive spanner in the works in terms of fantasy football. Because what that means is Benrahma, who's playing at the number 10, will now have direct competition from Lingard, who did really well there. And that's going to mean they're going to share minutes. He's not going to be as good of a pick. But I would definitely keep an eye on that. But it also means that Antonio probably won't still be on penalties. Lingard will probably be back on them, or someone else will be. But yeah, I think that it was a really interesting game. What stood out to me wasn't how good West Ham were. It was more how poor Newcastle were. I thought that I was expecting Newcastle to park the bus with Steve Bruce, but because of just how many attacking signings that they've made, like Willock, but also because of how many good attacking players they've got, like Fraser, Wilson, Alan St-Maximin, it makes sense that they play more attacking football, but they just suck at it because they can't defend either. They can't defend as a team. They can attack, definitely. They can definitely score goals, Newcastle, but they just can't defend unless they're playing super organised football and part of the bus style football. And even then, teams like Liverpool and City can still turn them over. So I don't predict it being a good season at all for Newcastle. I think they're going to let in a lot of goals, especially at home where they're pressured to win the game. So personally, I'll be targeting teams who are playing Newcastle, especially at home. And I'll be monitoring how Benrahma does over the next few weeks. Keep an eye on that Lingard. And yeah, going from there. And also keep an eye on Antonio because yes, he is a good pick, but he can also quite very easily pick up an injury. And if West Ham lose Antonio to injury, that's pretty much their main striker gone. They don't have a backup striker. And to be honest, they shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, I don't think even if they did have a backup striker, they'd be any good because Antonio has been their best striker without a doubt. So yeah, monitor the Lingard situation and target teams against Newcastle. Spurs versus Man City. I didn't get a chance to watch the game, but from the general gist of it, City created good chances, which is what I predicted, and Spurs played on the counter-attack, which is also what I predicted. What I didn't predict was that Spurs would win. I actually predicted either a draw, a 1-1, or that City would win 1-0 or something like that. But Spurs actually won 1-0, which I was quite surprised at. But what stood out to me is, like I say, they were playing on the counter-attack, which is what Nuno kind of specialises in. I don't think he's a natural, he's not got a natural team to create loads of chances unless Lo Celso is starting regularly and he comes out the park and just smashes it, or Dele Alli starts to become a really good creator. They strike me more as a counter-attacking team because of the pace they've got on the wings and because of just how good Son is. Having said that, I still think they can create chances, definitely through their wing-backs. I mean, Reguilon looks like a really good player. Tanganga played on the right. He's not good attacking, but defensively he just completely shut down Sterling and pretty much everything that was coming from that right side. So I think that Spurs looked really good defensively. They looked really good defensively. But what I would keep an eye on is that if you're targeting them for attacking players, I think they're mainly going to do well in their counter-attack. So target teams they're playing against where the team playing them is playing a high line, or they're just trying to play open play and they're quite vulnerable to a counter-attack, or just passing, cutting through them, and maybe even set pieces too. I think Nuno will probably introduce some set piece plays there. Okay, so that's the kind of general gist of how Game Week 1 went, and there was lots of information that came from this game week. I thought it was a really good way of getting information about each team and which ones to target. Remember that if you've not had a great game week, the hardest part of the season is the start, because we have the least information and the least amount of knowledge about each team. But as time goes on, I think from game week 1 to 3, once game week 3 is done, you'll have that international break, and I think that that's when you can start to make more accurate predictions. So I think definitely going forward, don't worry too much about the first few game weeks. They're just there for information more than anything. Yes, you want to score well, but the real important stages come more in the middle and the late season, because that's when you've got the information. You just got to make sure that you actually use it and use it to your advantage. So let's move on to game week 2 predictions. I know this is quite a long video, but bear with me because I think this is going to be quite important going forward. Now, keep in mind, I don't recommend getting in players for just one game week. I've gotten in my team purely for game weeks 1 to 3. And going forward, I'll be making transfers based on game weeks 4 to 7 and making sure that I get players in for that period. Like already I've known from looking at my team, game weeks 5 and 6, I've got a pretty weak team because I'll have Spurs and probably have Son. I won't have Man City. I won't have Leeds. I may not have Everton or Leicester. There's quite a lot of vulnerability there. And also, there's no Leicester again, no Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Spurs are playing Arsenal. So really, like from game week 5 and 6 is where I'm going to be making sure I adjust my team. But keep in mind, this is just purely game week 2 predictions. Don't bring in players just on this. I will make a video on players to bring in more for the long term, so you can stay tuned for that. But let's just get stuck into the game week 2 predictions. Okay, so first up we've got Liverpool versus Burnley. I think this will be a really interesting game. Obviously, I kind of predict Liverpool to win and probably will keep a clean sheet as well. But I don't predict it to be as high scoring as most people will think. I think a lot of people will be captaining Salah, but I don't think he's actually the best captaincy option this week. I think the Burnley are very much capable of parking the bus and then keeping that low block, which will make things difficult for Liverpool. Granted, I do think now that Van Dijk's back and they've got threat from set pieces, but I think actually I wouldn't be surprised if Matip or Van Dijk gets a goal here. Granted, Burnley are quite good at defending with headers because Tarkowski and Meek can do that, but I wouldn't expecting a high scoring game here. I'd probably predict like a 1-0 or a 2-0, maybe even a 2-1 or something like that. But I think the most likely outcome is probably going to be 1 to 2-0. I would probably go with 2-0. Aston Villa versus Newcastle, quite difficult to predict because Aston Villa didn't start nearly as well as I thought they would. But having said that, Newcastle also started pretty poorly, so I'm quite glad that I've got Ings in this case because I think that he'll probably put some goals past Newcastle. But equally, I wouldn't trust Aston Villa defence as well. If you've got Martinez, play him. I wouldn't transfer him out, but don't expect too much from him either. I'd probably predict. This is a tough one to predict. I think both teams will score. Yeah, definitely both teams will score. I think it'll be 2-2. I think there'll be goals in this game. But I predict it to be 2-2. I think it's probably going to be a draw. And yeah, I don't have too much faith in either of these teams. I think that both of them look quite vulnerable, but both of them can score goals. Crystal Palace versus Brentford. Brentford did look quite vulnerable to the counter-attack, but Crystal Palace looked vulnerable all around, and they didn't look like they were scoring that many goals. Personally, I think this is a difficult one to predict again. I think this will be either a Brentford win or a draw. But I think both teams will score, which means I would be targeting the likes of Tony and Buemo. Obviously, if you've already got them, I wouldn't bring them in for this fixture. But if you've already got them, keep them because I think that both Buemo or Tony could quite easily score. If you want a 1 week punt, I would maybe punt on Zaha because Brentford do look weak on that. on their right side, which is where Zaha plays. He plays on the left. So I could quite easily see Zaha getting a brace, maybe even a hat-trick in this game. But that would be a one-week punt. It's a very risky choice. So, and I wouldn't bring in Zaha for the long term. So that's purely a one-week punt if you want that. But I would predict both teams to score. I predict a 2-2 as well. I think this will probably be a draw and both teams will score. I think there'll be goals. Leeds versus Everton. This is quite a difficult one to predict. I think Phillips will be back, which is good for Leeds. But Everton look like a good team. I could quite easily see this going any of the three options. I could see this being a draw, or Leeds winning, or Everton winning. I could see this going in any three ways. But personally, that's just so difficult to predict. I can't predict a third draw, sure. But I think it probably will be still a draw. I think both these teams are pretty evenly matched. I think that Everton are good on the counter-attack and they're good on set pieces. And Leeds are vulnerable to both those things, but equally, Everton look quite easy to get at as well. So I think both teams will score, or equally, it could be a 0-0. I think this will be a 1-1. 1-1. I'm predicting 1-1. Both teams will score. I think it'll be a draw. Although saying that, I mean, I think this could be similar to the United Leeds game, where there either could be very few goals or loads of goals. But then again, Leeds are quite solid at home, so I think that I'm leaning towards a draw or a Leeds win. So I would either go with 1-1 or 2-0 for Leeds. But yeah, quite a difficult one to predict. But I would definitely target. If that's after this fixture, I will be targeting maybe Everton and Leeds. Although I think this fixture will be very telling on how players from those teams do, because both of them had tricky fixtures in the first week. So yeah, I think this will give us a lot of information about both these teams. But I think my most likely prediction is a 1-1 draw. Man City versus Norwich. I think this will be quite an easy one to predict. I think Man City will probably win fairly comfortably, but this could go two ways again, because in the past when Man City have played Norwich, they've had two different outcomes. I think at one point Norwich did actually beat them, but they were playing at home when they did that. But the alternative was that Norwich were away from home and they got smashed 5-0. And personally, I think that will probably happen again. Not 5-0, but I think maybe this could be a 3-0. I definitely see Man City beating them. It could either be 3-0 or 3-1. Because I could see Norwich maybe putting a goal past them. So I would definitely target Man City midfielders, but predicting which one will be in the starting lineup and score, that's challenging. So personally, I may be even bringing in Grealish. I think that Man City do have good long-term fixtures. We'll get into that in another video, but just purely for this fixture, I'll be targeting Man City players. Brighton versus Watford. Tricky fixture to predict. Watford are good on the counter-attack, clearly very good on the counter-attack, and I think that will play to their favour against Brighton. I could actually see this being a Watford win, even though I've got Sanchez in my team and I don't want Watford to score, I could very easily see this being a Watford win, or maybe even a draw. But I see goals in this game. I think that Watford will score in this game. I think that they've got scoring potential, and I think that Brighton will be vulnerable to that counter-attack. So, yeah, I think I predict a Watford win here. I think that Watford will surprise Brighton, and then once they do, looking at the next fixture, I don't think necessarily people bring in Watford players for the next fixture because they played Spurs, but I see this being a Watford win. I think I'll probably go with 2-1 to Watford. Southampton versus United. This could go very similar to the Leeds game. It could go either way. This could go with an absolute slaughter for Southampton. I think that they could let in at least 5 or 6 goals, or it could be shocking like 0-0 or 1-0 to Southampton, because they are capable of that. That's just what's so frustrating about Southampton, especially at home. Away from home, I predict them to lose comfortably, but at home, they just seem to be one of those teams that are so unpredictable. So, personally, if I wanted to go with my head, I would most likely predict a comfortable Man United win, and I think that they will probably put a few goals past Southampton. But don't be surprised if Southampton also score, or even shock United. But I think most likely outcome for me, comfortable United win. So I'll be targeting Fernandes and probably Greenwood. Wolves versus Spurs, a really interesting fixture. I think that This could go either way. I think I actually predicted a draw for this game. I think that Wolves eventually have got to start firing at some point, and they don't look like they've clicked just yet. I do think they looked very vulnerable to the counter attack. But I could see this. I could see this going either way because they looked very vulnerable to counter attack, and that's exactly what Spurs are good at. So this could easily be a bit of a thrashing for Wolves. I think Spurs could very well put like 3-4 goals past them. But equally, it's so. But in fact, now I'm going to change my prediction. I think I'm going to go with the Spurs win because I think the Wolves are vulnerable to the counter attack, and that's what Spurs specialise in. I would maybe even consider a captaincy on Son, but that may be a bit risky. So yeah, but I would predict the Spurs win. I think Wolves vulnerable to counter attack. That's what Spurs are good at. Arsenal versus Chelsea. Arsenal looks pretty shocking against Brentford. They don't look good at all. Chelsea, I'm predicting Chelsea to win the season. So I'm predicting a comfortable Chelsea win. I think it'll probably be a 1-0. I don't expect loads of goals in this game. I think it'll probably be a 1-0 and Chelsea to win. I don't know which player I'd predict because in a 1-0 anyone can score. Personally, I wouldn't target Lukaku just yet. If I was going to pick anyone from Chelsea for the early stages, probably Mason Mount because he's more nailed on start than most, and he's just so involved with everything. So Chelsea to win, in my opinion, and I don't have too much faith in Arsenal. West Ham versus Leicester, really interesting fixture. I say this is probably going to be the closest fixture out of all the games this week, which makes it tough to predict. Personally, I think that West Ham are very much capable of beating Leicester, and vice versa. I think Leicester are very capable of beating West Ham. West Ham had really good home form last season. They scored a lot of goals, and Leicester look vulnerable. They don't have their best centre-back starting, Johnny Evans. So I definitely predict that West Ham will score. A good time to target Tonio, Benrahma, maybe even Fornals, maybe Jared Bowen. Definitely a good time to target those guys. So I'm going to predict a West Ham win. I just think, I have a feeling that Leicester will lose. I think that West Ham are strong at home. They still look strong. The players do need some time to get a little fitter. I think that Harvey Barnes will give Kufal a rough time on that side, but I think it still could be a close game. I haven't said that, if that is the case, I don't think Harvey Barnes was available for this fixture last season. So I think it's going to be a draw or West Ham win. I think that Leicester attackers and West Ham attackers are good ones to target. I don't see clean sheets happening for either of these teams, so I'll be targeting West Ham attackers or fullbacks who can get an assist. And so, same for Leicester. I predict both teams to score. I'm going to predict a 2-2 for this one as well. Awesome, so that's this video done. That's the Game Week 2 predictions. We'll review how it does in Game Week 3. Stay tuned for my player prediction videos players to watch going forward, because that's going to be based on longer term strategy rather than just one game week. It's really important that you make transfers for the long term, not for the short term, because that's how your team gets in all sorts of headaches. So stay tuned for that and take care.